Welcome to In the Lab with Hoopsology. I am one half of the hosting crew here, Matt Thomas, joined as always by my best friend, Justin Goodrum. Justin, how you doing, man?
Good, man. Good. Can't complain. How about yourself?
Man, I got to be honest with you. Well, I'm doing great on a serious note. Thank you for asking. I got to be honest, though, with what we discussed last week, I was feeling, pun intended, the heat over this Eastern Conference Finals. I
Me
don't know
too.
about you, but I was sitting there watching that series like, man, we did a little mini taste of a preview of Denver versus Miami. And every game that passed by looked like, oh my goodness, are the Celtics going to make history here and make us look like fools? Um, so yeah, I was feeling the heat on that for sure.
No, agreed. I was pretty nervous there, but I'm glad that Miami came up strong and saved our podcast from embarrassment. So
Kind of, I mean, didn't really have a rooting interest, but then after that episode, it was like all of a sudden there's this loyalty to the Miami Heat going on
right.
there. So we're going to talk about that, the Eastern Conference Finals today. We're also going to talk about the Celtics moving forward, and we're going to take a deeper look into the NBA Finals and talk about if any of our feelings have changed since last week regarding that series. Need to mention, we will be mentioning some odds here, and we'll be using bovadasportsbook.com for those odds. Vegas knows a lot, so it helps to reference Vegas when we are analyzing this. They don't want to lose money, so they usually have a pretty good feel for setting these odds, as you all well know if you've ever watched sports. So let's get into it. We have um, a surprisingly exhilarating Eastern Conference Finals. The Heat, as we mentioned last week, at that point, they were up 3-0 when we last recorded. That night, they played again, and the Celtics got the win in game 4. Of course, they go on to win game 5. Game 6 has the Derek White buzzer beater that was just littered with controversy at the end of the game there. That 2-minute report, everyone was kind of keeping their eyes out on the official report there, but everything does seem to be legitimate there. They go to game 7, and as you all know, if you were listening to the last couple of minutes, yes, the Heat did get the job done. Justin, first I want to ask you, how do you feel about the Celtics? Let's not even consider next season, but the Celtics as a unit right now, just in that they were able to come back and win 3. They become the 5th team in NBA history to push a 3-0 deficit into a 3-3 tie and even get the chance to make history on that. How do you feel about them? Do you feel a little less doom and gloom, or are feelings a little bit unchanged because they still lost the series?
Yeah, I feel more optimistic. Like Stephen A. Smith said, basically, you have to give credit for Boston coming back as much as you want to, badmouth them from falling 3-0. So I think that credit's well deserved. I think the main issues is what I pointed out the last time we were talking, and that's just just them running their offense and their defense. I think there's some addressed. Now the main question is, how do you do that? Do you break up Tatum and Brown? Do you just move the pieces around him? Do you make a coaching change? Um, in my mind, I don't think it's time to panic. I team showing the resiliency of coming back from 3-0, I think shows overall that there's a lot of potential in this team to be title contenders in the future, but there's still a lot of concerns.
Absolutely. It's interesting, a lot of talk back and forth of course about coach Joe Mazzulla. Coaches in this league, and not this league alone, but in this league especially, become scapegoats in these situations. And Joe Mazzulla has taken a lot of heat. I think for the most part, he's handled that criticism pretty well and pretty gracefully. So I do give him credit for that. And I do still sympathize, like we talked about last week, that he was kind of thrown in a tough position last minute and doesn't really have a whole lot of experience on the coaching bench with him to help guide him. I mean, this isn't like a Steve Nash scenario where his first coaching job, but he had Mike D'Antoni on the bench for him in Brooklyn. This is, really uncharted territory for that entire coaching staff. Does seem to me, I don't know that the Celtics coming back those 3 games changes anything in terms of outlook on that coaching staff. There are also rumors, I don't know if you saw that this week, that 3 of the assistant coaches are rumored to go to Houston with Coach Udoka. I assume they previously worked under him on that Celtics staff. So that's an interesting element of that too. So it would be Joe Mazzulla and I think maybe like 2 other coaches still remaining if those 3 get poached. And I wonder if at that point, if there's any truth to that, as a Celtics organization, do you just say like, come on, we've got a full off season. Let's put together a full coaching staff. I think regardless, just to give my thoughts real quick, no matter what, you're going to be looking to sign veteran coaches on the bench, whether Joe Mazzulla is in or out. You do have some time if you want to hire a new head coach. Some of the big names already signed. We got news just recently that Coach Nick Nurse has been signed to the Philadelphia 76ers to be their new head coach, which is very interesting given he has a past Daryl Morey connection. But point being, you're missing out on some of the prime coaching candidates this point if you're Boston. So I don't know if there's any interest in Coach Bud, and given the personal issues, if Coach Bud is looking to get back into coaching right away. Monty Williams is another name that comes to mind who I think would be a good person to look at. And then, of course, there are plenty of attractive assistants around the league as well that could get their first coaching shot. But it seems like that would be an odd route to go, given you just promoted Joe Mazzulla, who was an assistant, to head coach, and we saw how that went. So I don't know. Do you have any sort of, I guess, lane that you would pick if you have your Brad Stevens cap on, or any sense of the direction the Celtics would take?
Yeah, I think my mind is patience. We talked about it a few weeks ago how a lot of other teams were hitting a panic mode, firing coaches, and I felt that was a huge mistake. And I feel that's a huge mistake here with Joe Mazzulla, considering the trials and tribulations this team had to go through and the way they performed. I think that matters in the long run, and I just don't know hiring another coach. That's a huge gamble in terms of improving the situation. But there's been precedent with this. Take a look at Mark Jackson and then Steve Kerr, right? So it's proven to work in certain cases. So I think if Boston is going to make a coaching change, I don't know how you do this. You need to tell the future, but I think it's only going to prove dividends if they win the title with whatever coach they pick. So it's a huge risk, but we've seen it work with Golden State. So we'll see.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, they did have the coaching change away from Mark Jackson under that same core, but you're right. I mean, it is a unique situation because they felt like they had their guy with Coach Udoka, and then obviously this chaotic scandal happens. That's kind of out of their control, completely on Coach Udoka from the sound of things that we've heard, and now they're thrust into this. I want to give you so so we have all the talk now goes to, aside from the coaching change, this CBA terms are being I guess promoted as a major talking point this week, and in conjunction with, do you keep Jaylen Brown together? Do you keep Jason Tatum, those two as your dynamic duo going forward, given that they both will be able to command a supermax? And so, just for clarity's sake, the difference here for Jaylen Brown, depending on how his offseason goes, if he goes to another team, like, for example, since Coach Udoka is there are a lot of rumors they'll package a trade for Jaylen Brown. If the Rockets end up signing him, which they would need to, because if he signs the supermax with the Celtics, I believe I read friend of the show, Keith, blanking on his last name, but does the GM rundown show. Anyway, if the Celtics sign uh, Jaylen Brown, then they can't trade him for a year. So that kind of brings up an interesting dynamic that you can't really do like sign and trade in that case. So if Jaylen Brown gets signed by another team next year, say he walks, 4 years, $189 million, 30% max of the salary cap. The difference is 35% of the salary cap if he's signed the supermax by the Celtics, and that goes for 5 years. So that would equate to 5 years, $295 million, which sounds like a lot of money, but the salary cap is going up. But there are harsher limitations. It's not technically a hard cap, but it is a penalized cap more so than just a luxury fine. There are certain things that you can't do. For example, trading first round picks that aren't within a certain number of years. It limits the roster moves you can make to go over the cap. There are lots of sides of how people are feeling about that, and we can talk about that during this offseason. But an interesting thing about this game 7 and that dynamic duo, and no, they are not Jordan and Pippen, but I just want to show you kind of some similarities here, Justin, in that game 7, the Celtics lose 103-84 to the Miami Heat, so 19 points there. Interesting. In 1990, before Jordan and Pippen had won anything, they lost 93-74 to the Detroit Pistons. 19 points. How old is Jaylen Brown? He's 26. How old is Michael Jordan in 1990? 26. How old is Jason Tatum? 25. How old was Scottie Pippen when they lost to the Pistons? 25. Interesting. So you have a dynamic duo. And yes, I know it's blasphemy, and I'm not saying they're Jordan and Pippen. Once again, let me repeat that. But they're the same age. They're going to be coming into the peak of their athletic prime. So I still am of the view that you keep these guys together if at all possible. That hasn't changed since last week. Do you have any other feelings? And I'm sorry for saying a mouthful there. I just wanted to set this up before we discussed it. Any changes? I know you mentioned with the coaching staff and with the organization, like kind of patience being a virtue there. How do you feel about the roster?
Feel pretty good about the roster. I think the question is just with this team, them just jacking up shots. I just, especially how talented they are. Like, I don't get the
Yeah.
sense that they're a team that is deficient offensively. They just do just like the dumbest stuff offensively. So if we see this trend, in future years, I think that is a point of. I don't think it's anything to panic yet. I think, like you said, the nucleus is Tatum and Brown. I think.
Yeah, I would agree with patience as well. As we just discussed. So another thing to factor into is how razor thin this series was, and I kind of want to shift over to the Heat side of things before we preview the finals, because you have a stretch where you look super impressive as the Miami Heat, and you win those first 3 games like we talked about last week, and then you drop 3. And I think there's some understanding on my side there, because I picked the Celtics in 6. I just think much more talented roster. Plus, the Miami Heat has at least had coming into the series far more injuries than the Celtics. But they get it done, to their credit, on the road, which I find super impressive in a game 7. And at least at the start of the game, that Celtics fan base was rocking. Huge bummer that Jason Tatum, sprains his ankle right at the start of the game, first play.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, honestly, that's the mega difference for game 7, is that he was it was like his wings were clipped, and he was kind of functionally like a decoy, basically on offense, and the rest of the team couldn't really step up and carry the water for him, so to speak. So I think the Heat, of course, fate smiled upon them with that, unfortunately for Jason Tatum and the Celtics, but they still have the grit to get that done. Jimmy Butler wins the Larry Bird Trophy, Eastern Conference, um, Eastern Conference Finals MVP. How did you feel about that? Jimmy Butler getting the nod over Caleb Martin. Do you think that's pretty uncontroversial? He deserved that, or do you think there was a better case to be made for Caleb Martin, specifically for the conference finals series?
Yeah, I think Caleb Martin played more consistent. I won't have too much to add here. I think there's some exceptions. I think you and I agree that year that Andre Iguodala outrage. But I think overall, you usually see it go to kind of the most popular player in mind. But I agree.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think it's surprising given that it sort of crescendoed for Caleb Martin at the very end of that series. Usually that type of momentum persuades voters. I think in the example that you cited, I mean that Andre Iguodala vote um, was a case of momentum as well. If I remember correctly, Steph Curry played pretty well in the beginning of the series, and then it kind of became a narrative like, oh, does he have some sort of deficiency in the playoffs or something like that? And the award goes to Andre Iguodala because he guarded LeBron James for that series, and that was the toughest task for that series. And I still disagree with that to this day. Like you mentioned, it's a constant. I think stain on the history of NBA. No disrespect to Andre Iguodala. Credit to him for winning that. Um, but I think another thing with this award that I think is real is that I think reporters are scared of getting criticism if if Jimmy Butler didn't get it. Now, I don't think it would happen right away because he's not going to slight his teammate like that. But I think later on down the road they could see some sort of backlash from Jimmy Butler in a later interview, because he would probably remember who didn't vote for him in that. Who knows? Maybe I'm overestimating the pettiness there, but um, could happen. So, um, in terms of moving to the finals now, we have NBA Finals that starts tomorrow night. It's May 31st today. So June 1st, we get game one of the NBA Finals. And um, there's a lot of angles here. And it still seems, looking on Bovada, Denver is the series favorite. That has not changed. I think, if anything, that has only increased since last week. Um, there were Celtics odds on Bovada to be they were the second title favorites after game four, I believe, in that series when they won that game. So interesting how favored they were on paper. But again, those odds on Bovada, minus 430 for Denver to win the series and plus 320 for Miami to win the series. Just what we talked about last week, Justin, was kind of, you and I agreed, the only pure advantage that we could see in the Heat's favor was maybe that coaching staff and the schemes that the Heat use. I don't think they're going to be able to use a zone defense as effectively against the Nuggets. I just think with how solid that team's chemistry is, I think they'll break the zone a lot easier than the Celtics, who took 4 or 5 games to figure out how to break it and then still struggled with it as we moved on in that series. Do you see any other advantages from what Miami has shown leading into this finals? Anything there that maybe we didn't get to observe last week?
Not really, but I will say an intangible experience with Spoelstra and with Jimmy Butler. I mean, this is a new environment for the Denver Nuggets. They've never been to the NBA Finals before in terms of this. And I think that is a factor in terms of this crunch time moment. That's a better team, the Denver Nuggets. I think as I stated earlier, I picked the Nuggets in 5, and I'm standing by that. But the reason why I'm giving the Heat that game advantage is just due to of that pressure and things not going right. I think with Jokic, I think he'll be able to overcome that. But with Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Aaron Gordon, there are other role players. If things go wrong in the NBA Finals, that's tough. But I do think as a Michael Malone, and I don't know, he really. Maybe other coaches have the same philosophy that he does, but I get the sense he really cares for his players. And I think
Totally.
that's going to be huge in terms of overcoming. In terms of, I like his he doesn't give a crap attitude. I don't think he's going to panic, even if somehow they fall, 2 games. So nothing, if just things do not go according to plan, I think he's always going to have his teammates back. And I think ultimately that's going to be um, a factor to offset the Heat surprising them in a couple of games. So, but at the same time, that is an intangible. The Heat's experience, I don't think it will be enough to spring the upset. But we've counted out the Heat every round of the series, every round of the playoffs. So I mean, who knows? They're about to surprise.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think for my part, I've definitely underestimated the Denver Nuggets as well through much of the playoffs. Glad to see them in the position they're in here. The Heat. It's also been speculated that they are ramping up Tyler Hero. He may be able to rejoin the team and make a Game 3 debut, is what we're hearing. And I'm wondering at this point if that would get in the way of the rhythm that they have. They could certainly use another body in that rotation, especially the Nuggets can run pretty deep as well. So that's an advantage in depth right now that the Nuggets certainly have over the Miami Heat. Um, do you are you nervous the way that I am about a Tyler Hero return?
Um, I think there's a risk, but I think at this point, all hands on deck. You need everybody. I think there's such an underdog. I think you need him just for scoring. I think if they were like the favorites or they're like the 1 seed, if they had a smooth sailing to the finals, I think then I would say there'd be more trepidation. But this need all hands on deck. You need everybody. So I'd rather play him than not.
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I just think he'll have, a very very uh, short grace period, so to speak. If he's going out there and throwing up shots or putting the offense out of rhythm in any way, then I think he will see the bench pretty quickly. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out, and if he is even able to return. I think in large part it'll depend on where where we are. If Miami can get a win in Denver, um, then there's going to be less panic and maybe less urgency to have him return compared to if they're down 2-0, like you said, all hands on deck, let's get it going. Speaking of these opening games in Denver, what we do know right now is that Bovada has the Nuggets as 9-point favorites, um, minus 380 if you want to bet just to win the game for the Denver Nuggets. So pretty heavy favorites there, which kind of surprised me that the number is that high, a 9-point favorite. But certainly could see that being the case. The Heat come into the game a little bit more tired, certainly, than the Nuggets, you would have to assume. And if things get out of hand, you could see them potentially pulling the starters, mid to late fourth quarter there if it's a double digit lead at that point. Um, I would be pretty surprised if the Heat came in and won game 1. One thing I do think if the Heat are going to be successful in this series, so other than just talking about that coaching advantage, I think the other side of it also, although Denver can be a very physical team as well, I saw it in person when they were able to handle the Bucks' physicality back in March. But I think the Heat need to be really, really physical with the Nuggets. I think they need to try to make Jokic angry, if at all possible. I don't think it's going to work, for the record, but I think that is one of their only hopes, is to play really, really physical defense and hope that they can throw them off rhythm there. Um, do you see the Heat coming in physical like that? Maybe like Bam directly on Jokic, and just trying to be a little bit more handsy with the Nuggets than past teams that have played them have been?
I think he's just mentally tough. I don't see that throwing him off his game at all. But I do think it's worth pursuing. I mean, they need every advantage they're going to get. They're just such a massive underdog.
Gotcha. Yeah. And looking at impact players for the series, so of course the obvious names are there. So we'll list them on Bovada. It looks like Jokic is the favorite to be Finals MVP. Makes sense since the Nuggets are the favorite to win the series. He's at minus 300. Jimmy Butler is your second favorite at plus 325. Jamal Murray plus 950, or I'm sorry, plus 900. Bam at plus 2500. And then even before Michael Porter Jr., Caleb Martin at plus 5,000 is your fifth place um, odds-on favorite for Finals MVP. So that would be quite the interesting series to play out if Caleb Martin were Finals MVP. I mean, it would be a Star is Born type of situation for that to happen. And we'll see. That's why you play the games, right? So I'm with you. I think I have the Nuggets winning this series in 5 games as well. Based on what we've seen, I think the longer series, analysts talk about this debate all the time of, do you want a long layoff before you play a game one, or do you want a shorter layoff so you stay more in rhythm? I don't think rhythm is going to be a problem for the Nuggets at all. And I think it's good that they got this opportunity to rest up, so that they can come out running right out of the gates and have a full tank, so to speak, for this game one. I I would be pretty concerned if I'm a Heat fan. But then again, you're the second 8 seed in history to make the NBA Finals. What you've already done to this point is pretty incredible. So this is an experienced team. There are guys on this team that have won titles. Well, looking at Kyle Lowry, this Heat squad, the core of it was in the finals back in 2020, as you know, Justin, during that bubble season. So I guess 2021. So I think there's a lot of experience here, and certainly Jimmy Butler is not going to be happy being second place in the finals, nor is anyone else on that squad. So any other thoughts about this series? Any other main takeaways that you have before we wrap up here?
Uh, Not much. Just the Heat on Bovada. They're plus 2,400 to win. I think 2,400 to win the title next year. So
Wow.
this tells you just the disrespect.
Well, for Justin Goodrum, I am Matt Thomas. Hope you enjoyed this finals preview and that breakdown. We will be back with you very soon, and we will be dropping interviews as we always do on our feed throughout the rest of the season, and some interviews coming your way over the off season as well. So stay tuned. Thank you so much if you made it this far for listening and supporting the show. We really appreciate it, and we hope you enjoy the NBA Finals. For Justin Goodrum, I'm Matt Thomas, and peace out.